Hey there, it's Amy and I'm back for part 2 of my garden design tips videos. These videos don't have to be viewed in order, so feel free to continue watching this one, and then if you missed part 1 of this series, you can go back and watch that at the end of this video. If you want all of the tips together in a nice PDF format, go to the link in the description and I'll email that to you right away. And let's just get right into part 2 of my favorite garden design tips to help you get your dream garden. My next garden design tip is to add multiple layers of plants in your landscape. So widen those borders, make them deeper if it's possible. I know a lot of homeowners have just small areas that are 2 to 4 feet wide. If you can extend those to be an 8-foot or a 10-foot wide border, you have the ability to add multiple layers of plants. And that's going to make your space feel really lush and beautiful. The way that I start with layering is I create a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. So layering involves not just using perennial plants, but all different types of plants. So you're going to want a small tree or some other focal point. You're going to want evergreens. You're going to want deciduous shrubs. You're going to also want grasses and vines and ground covers and perennials. So you're mixing all different types of plants, and then you're layering them in the landscape into those 3 different rows. If you want a traditional look, that's totally fine. If you want a more cottage look, you want to stagger those plants and sort of weave them in and out of those 3 rows to create that more cottage style or naturalistic look in your garden. Landscape layering is a really complex process. I go over this a lot in my Design Your 4-Season Garden course. I also have another video and an article on my website about this if you want to read further. I'll leave some links in the description below so you can dive right into that. But let's just get on to the next tip. My next garden design tip is to use texture and foliage to your advantage in your garden. A lot of homeowners are really relying far too much on the blooming in their garden, but there's so much to love and be excited about with texture and foliage in your garden. I'm just going to flip the camera around so I could show you some examples just in this single pathway here of how many textures I have. There's nothing blooming in these plants, but they still look beautiful. Okay, so here we have some coral bells. And then right next to it, I have just a baby fig tree. You could see the big, bold texture of the leaves on this, even though it doesn't have fruit yet. Just a beautiful, beautiful plant. And here I even have a mixture of textures on the ground. I have ajuga and I have creeping jenny mixed together. Check the conditions where you live and make sure that everything you're planting is safe to plant, that it's not invasive in your space. And then if you go right up here, I have a beautiful Carl Forster grass, a little bird bath over there, a little bird bath there. Another garden design tip is to balance your garden using plant weights instead of just symmetry. So there's really 4 main types of garden styles that I like to categorize them as. There's actually tons of them, but these are the 4 main ones. They're naturalistic, cottage, traditional, and modern. And out of those 4 main groupings or categories, traditional is really the only garden style that relies on symmetry, which means just planting the same thing on one side as you would plant on the other. Modern designs, naturalistic designs, and cottage style gardens all focus on asymmetry. And the best way that I can explain this is to not plant the same thing on this side as you would on this side. Instead, you have to balance those plants. So if you have a very tall plant or a very big shrub over here, imagine liquefying that plant into a liquid form and putting it in a glass. And then if you have other shrubs or plants on the other side, imagine how much of that liquid you would have to pour. If they're smaller, maybe you need 3 smaller plants that are similar to this one to balance the landscape. And you can just keep doing that as you go through the border. So you want balance, but you don't have to be symmetrical with that balance. 1 big shrub can balance out 3 smaller ones. And the other great thing about this is that you don't need to have the same conditions on this side as you do on this side, because sometimes with a house, you'll have a sun area on the left, and then you'll have a shade area or a partial shade area on the right. So using this tactic of balancing your plants from left to right lets you choose different plants on the side that work in the sun levels that you have without sacrificing that look, that it looks balanced and it feels like it's all one space. Lots of ways to do this. I go over a lot of this in my Design Your 4-Season Garden course. I'm going to leave a link in the description below if you want to check that out. Another great garden design tip is to match your hardscaping to the style of the garden that you want. I love cottage gardens, so I have a lot of rustic and lumpy, bumpy textures in my garden. I have a reclaimed brick patio. I have a river rock walkway behind me. And using that type of hardscaping really reinforces that this is a cottage style garden. So naturalistic is actually the most lumpy and bumpy of textures. You would want to use really bumpy, really rustic, even a gravel or flagstone and things like that. And then as you get up into different garden styles, the hardscaping will change. So cottage, you think reclaimed brick or other lumpy, bumpy things. As you get into traditional style gardens, you're going to see less lumpy and bumpiness. You might still have a brick or a paver of some kind, but they're going to have less texture to them. And then modern designs have the most smooth and sleek hardscaping. So if you're trying to get that look of a traditional garden, do some research on what types of hardscaping materials would reinforce that traditional garden style for you and use that. Another great thing about doing this is you can actually mix different garden styles together. So you can have a cottage style planting with a really modern style hardscaping. As long as you're doing that intentionally, it can work really well to combine two different styles together. Another garden design tip is to choose plants that bloom or have interest in all different seasons. So one easy way to do this is just to shop at multiple times of a year, just so that you have plants that are blooming in the spring, summer, fall, and don't forget about evergreens for winter interest. I also have a course called Design Your 4-Season Garden, which teaches you exactly step by step how to do this and how to get color and interest in every single season. And just remember that having a 4-season garden doesn't mean that everything is in bloom from spring through winter. It means that things change throughout the seasons. This is one of my absolute favorite things about having a 4-season garden, is that it looks completely different when I go out in spring versus summer versus fall versus winter. It's always changing, it's always evolving, and it looks great in every single season. Another side tip for this is to try to find plants that have multiple seasons of interest. This is especially important when you have a small garden, because obviously you're going to need the space to fit that many plants in your garden. So something like an autumn brilliance serviceberry tree, for example, it's a small tree or a large multi-stem shrub form. And in the spring, it blooms with white flowers. And then in June, it gets service berries or June berries on it. And then in the winter, the autumn brilliance variety will turn bright red. So that's something that has interest in spring, in summer, and fall, and then even in winter it has really beautiful gray bark that looks nice when the snow is setting on it. So that tree is actually a 4-season tree. There's lots of other plants and shrubs that you can use in your garden that will give you that 4 seasons of interest, or at least multiple seasons of interest, and that's a great way to do it if you have a small space. Another garden design tip is to try to incorporate native plants into your landscape. Native plants are really great for the ecosystem. They're really great for the environment. They're great for wildlife. And the best thing about them is that they'll even grow in the wild in the area that you live without any human intervention. So that means they're really easy to take care of. And that's the best thing about native plants. If you find ones that are native to where you specifically live in the world, and you plant those, you're not going to have to do a lot of maintenance. One thing that I will warn, however, is that there's a lot of native plants that are aggressive or grow very big because they're meant to grow in the wild. So you may need to do your research before you plant anything to make sure that it's not an aggressive grower or it's going to get too big for your space. There's also native cultivars that have come out that basically are just dwarf versions of a larger shrub. Like I have behind me, I have Joe Pye weed, and the variety is called Baby Joe. There's nothing different about Baby Joe versus regular Joe Pye weed other than the height of the plant. So when you find nativars like that are only really shrinking the size but not changing the leaf color or anything like that, they're still really good for the environment and they'll fit into your home garden a lot better. So do your research on that, but native plants are always really low maintenance and easy to care for. So that's it for part 2 of my garden design tips video. If you like these tips and you want to save them, make sure you go to the link in the description where I'm going to have a PDF that I can email right to you, and you'll have a list of all of these tips right at your fingertips. And if you want to keep watching, I'm going to put a link back to that part 1 of the garden design tips sequence so that you could see that one too if you missed it. And I'll see you over in that video. Bye for now.